Good morning and good afternoon, NACCE members and friends. Thanks so much for joining us today on our webinar in partnership with the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. Before we jump into the content of the webinar, I just wanted to go over a couple housekeeping items. Number one, this webinar is being recorded, so you will receive the slides as well as this recording in about 24 hours from now. It will automatically be emailed to you since you are registered for this event. As well, it's also housed on the NACCE website in our webinar archive for our members indefinitely. Also, if you are on Twitter, we do encourage you to share your insights, what you've learned, what you found to be interesting from this webinar. So we ask that you use the hashtag NACCE member webinar, as well as tag the NACCE account, as well as the ELI account as well too. Gary's also our presenter that I'm going to introduce here in a second is also on Twitter and very active as well. So we'd encourage you to tweet back and forth with him so we can share our learnings on the web as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and give a little introduction to Gary, as well as to his organization, the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. I've been with the organization, with NACCE, for almost 5 years now, and we've been partnering with ELI ever since I joined, but even before then. So this organization has been a wealth of information and provided a ton of valuable assets to our members, as well as to the community college world in itself as well too. So a bit more about Gary. He is an author and entrepreneur himself. He has emerged as an internationally recognized thought leader in the field of entrepreneurial mindset education and training. If you've been at any of our NACCE conferences in the past, you most likely will have either met Gary or heard him speak on either one of our sessions or on our main stage. He is also the co-author of the book, Who Owns the Ice House? 8 Life Lessons from an Unlikely Entrepreneur, which is an international bestseller. I know I have a copy of the book, and it's an excellent book to read, so I would encourage you all to check that out as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Gary, and he can share a bit more about himself or his organization, and then we'll jump into the content of the webinar.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Leah, and to NACCE for hosting us. We have been a long-time partnership. I feel so passionately that community colleges are the place to, foster entrepreneurial mindsets. So I'm super excited to be here. I'm coming to you from my super swanky hotel room in Boston. I'm at a conference right now that's Human Capital Institute conference in Boston. It's being held at this giant brand new casino hotel complex. It's kind of amusing. But anyway, so I'm going to shut my camera off. Just want to say hello to everyone. I'm going to shut my camera off now and jump right into the presentation. And so the title of this presentation is The Nature of the Goal Pursuit and How Understanding Our Basic Psychological Needs Can Lead to Optimal Human Engagement. I know that's a mouthful. Bear with me. I've got some really interesting and exciting things to share with you. So I'm going to start with this sort of obvious statement that entrepreneurial activity is essential to creating vibrant, equitable, sustainable organizations, communities, and society as a whole. I mean, that's why NACCE exists. That's why we're all on this webinar. I read a paper recently that started with a line. The guy said that entrepreneurs are arguably the most important players in a modern economy. And we can debate about that, but I think you get the intent here. And so when we look at the behavior of entrepreneurials, and I like to use entrepreneurial to sort of broaden our thinking about entrepreneurship beyond just those who start businesses. But the point is that entrepreneurs or entrepreneurials tend to be highly resilient, resourceful, creative, critical thinkers. They're able to identify and solve problems within resource-constrained environments where the rules are not clear and the path is not well defined. And when we look at the attitudes, behaviors, and skills of the entrepreneurial, we see that these are the skills that not only enable them to adapt and thrive in an ever-changing world of work, but also they're equipped with, they're hyper engaged, and they're equipped with the attitudes and skills that not only enable them to adapt, but they're with the attitudes and skills that enable them to make greater contributions to their organizations, their communities, and societies as a whole, right? So we all understand, like, the entrepreneurial people, they have the attributes, the attitudes, the attributes, the skills that we want to cultivate in our children, that we want to see in our students, that we want to see in our workforce, that we want to see in our leaders, right? So the question really is, why do some people behave this way when most of us don't, right? Why are the small, when the vast majority of our students are not engaged, about 2/3, when the vast majority, also about 2/3 of our workforce is not engaged, we look at entrepreneurs as hyper engaged. The question becomes why, right? So why are they so engaged? But what can we learn from them that can help us be more innovative and entrepreneurial in our work, whatever that might be? And the second question is, how can we create learning and working environments that encourage others to develop the similar attitudes, behaviors, and skills? And so that's something I've been thinking about for a long time. I've been thinking about this and working on this idea for more than 25 years. In 2007, late 2007, 2008, I was hired by the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute to start to do some research there. I got to interview hundreds of entrepreneurs around the United States. 2010, we got to partner with the Kauffman Foundation and there to continue our research, and that's where we, with the partnership with Kauffman Foundation, some early investment, that we built the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program. So what I want to share with you today is one specific, a big idea, and then I'm going to drill down into something a little smaller. But first, I want to start with a simple definition of entrepreneurship, right? And this is really where we need to start. We need to define it in a way that everyone can embrace it, right? So I've crafted this definition very carefully, and I'm going to define it as entrepreneurship as the pursuit of opportunities to create value for others. And I should probably italicize that. It's the pursuit of opportunities to create value for others. And that for others is really the key to understanding why entrepreneurs are so engaged. So let me start with that. Now, what I also want to say is that, for most of us, we tend to think about entrepreneurs as having as some sort of, dispositional traits that lead to their behavior. They're somehow endowed with, what one economist described as scientifically unfathomable abilities. Like, you can't, behaviorists have tried to look at, hereditary traits and match it to entrepreneurial inclinations, and the correlation there is so far proven to be pretty weak. And we don't ever really think about it, but most of us think that entrepreneurs are somehow uniquely endowed. It's a dispositionally, it's a dispositional thing. And what I want to introduce is this idea that if we assume that entrepreneurs are sort of born rather than cultivated, then we overlook the social, the environmental, and the situational factors that either encourage or inhibit the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. And that's really, that's the big meta theory of all of our work, right? Is that if we think that entrepreneurs are somehow uniquely endowed, or that's, the entrepreneurial spirits in some people, but not in all, the rest of us have to continue to learn how to be employees, and a few of us will become entrepreneurs. We continue to think of it in that binary way. We continue to overlook these subtle situational factors that either encourage or inhibit the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. And so I want to introduce this concept, and I borrowed this from two social psychologists, Nisbet and Ross, in a phenomenal book that was recommended by Malcolm Gladwell. It's called The Person and the Situation. And so the analogy looks like this. I'm going to use medieval physics, and I borrowed this from Nisbet and Ross, right? And it's, bear with me here. So what they're saying is that in medieval physics, it was believed that if I threw a ball, that I was instilling energy in that ball, and that the energy that I instilled in the ball would somehow dissipate and the ball would fall to earth. And that was, as Nisbet and Ross described, the perfectly intuitive but utterly incorrect understanding of physics. And this guy named Newton comes along and says, hold on there, fellas. That's incorrect. What we're failing to recognize is these invisible forces within the environment within which that ball exists. And of course, in physics, we're talking about gravity, but I think the analogy is a good one that when we look at entrepreneurs, we tend to think it's something within them, and we fail to recognize the subtle, invisible factors within the environment that either encourage or inhibit the behavior. And so this introduces this fundamental attribution error, which is a concept from social psychology. And it's basically the tendency to overemphasize the importance of dispositional traits while overlooking the social, environmental, and situational factors that influence our behavior. That's sort of a quick definition of fundamental attribution error. So it's a fancy way of saying of superstitious. We're assigning the wrong cause to the effect. And so I want to pause here and make a point, and that is, when we look at the value of cultivating entrepreneurial behavior in our children, ourselves, our students, our workers, our leaders, what have you, we can't afford to be making this fundamental attribution error. We can no longer afford to think some people have it and some people don't, and we can continue to educate our children and our students and our workers in a way that often discourages the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. That's my big point. So let's talk about what makes a goal compelling. And this is really, I guess I would come this a primer in modern motivational theory. And it comes from the work of Deci and Ryan, two social psychologists. They were at Rochester, and now they think they're sort of retired and scattered across the world. But their idea is called self-determination theory. And I would encourage those of you who are interested to Google search motivation and goal pursuits. And in your search, motivation and goal pursuits, type in Deci, D-E-C-I, and Ryan, R-Y-A-N, and you'll find more about, if you just Google search self-determination theory, they have a website that sort of lays it out. But it goes like this, right? Self-determination theory is based on this premise that humans, like all other living organisms, have an innate, we all have within us this organismic tendency towards lifelong growth, social integration, and well-being, right? And to put this in simple terms, every one of us is an acorn with the inherent capacity to become a mighty oak tree, right? And that's sort of I use the acorn as a simple analogy to talk about self-determination theory. This is the basic assumption, right? That we're all born with this inherent proclivity towards lifelong growth and self-actualization. I think it was Carl Rogers described this as the master motivator, right? This tendency to become all that we can become. I think it was Maslow who said, what a man can be, he must be. So that's where we're starting from, that every one of us, you can see this when you walk out of your building and walk across the parking lot. You can see a little plant trying to grow up through a crack in the asphalt, right? Every living thing has this tendency to self-actualize, right? Now, what Deci and Ryan point out that, and this is where they really sort of brought us out of the dark ages in our understanding of motivation. When I refer to the dark ages, I mean sort of the behaviorist view of the 20th century that told us that motivation came from outside the individual in the form of some form of carrots and sticks. And that's sort of B.F. Skinner's conditioning thinking that, you know, that motivation is all comes from without out of us. What Deci and Ryan have shown is that, you know, we all have basic physiological needs for food, clothing, and shelter that are quite obvious. And that's, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What Deci and Ryan are saying, have shown in their work, is that we also have these basic psychological needs. And they refer to these as nutriments. It's an interesting word. So there's three basic psychological needs or nutriments. And what Deci and Ryan are saying, when those nutriments are attainable, that the human, like optimal engagement will occur. Optimal human flourishing will occur when these basic psychological needs are met or when they're attainable. Now, here's the flip side. When those needs are not attainable, and you know, they chose the word attainable because the responsibility for attaining them is both, you know, the person and the situation. So that's an important point of it. It's not just up to the individual. The environment has to provide, you know, contribute to the nutriments, and it's not just environmental. There's human agency as a part of it. So it's the person and the situation. The point being that, you know, certain goals, when we're unable to meet these basic psychological needs, when that need satisfaction is thwarted, we tend to turn towards need substitutes, and that's the Deci and Ryan language, right? And a need substitute, what's so interesting, and this is what was sort of spelled out in the promotional language for this webinar, that the pursuit of need substitutes, and we'll talk about what that is in a minute, further undermines or thwarts our ability to get our true psychological needs met. So, you know, I'll go into this in just a second. So I'm going to start by saying what these three psychological needs are the core ingredients that lead to intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is the most potent form of motivation known to man, right? And so the three ingredients, or these nutriments, are the need for autonomy, the need for competency, and the need for relatedness. You've probably heard this, you know, spelled out more commonly as autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? The competency and relatedness is just a little more academic, a little more precise in the language. But basically, what Deci and Ryan are saying is we have these three powerful psychological needs. We need to feel that we're free to make our own choices, that we're in control of our lives. We need to feel that we're effective, that we're developing the competencies and the ability to face the challenges, the ambient challenges, and that we're engaged in work that matters, that we matter to other people. And so those are the most important needs, right? Now, what's tricky here is that, you know when you're hungry or when you're tired or when you're cold or wet or whatever, like your physiological needs, no one needs to tell you you're hungry. But these psychological needs, they're more nuanced, and it's not as obvious that we need them. And there's so much societal pressure. So a need substitute might look like this, right? We might run out and buy a car we can't afford, right? We want to go buy the BMW so we can feel good about ourselves. And we ask ourselves, why are we buying the BMW? And we say, well, because of the superior driving performance and all that. You know, what it really comes down to is it's a need substitute for our need to matter to other people. And in many cases, if we don't, it's a need substitute. If we don't feel like we're making a contribution to our community, to our peers, to our, society, then, we don't get that need met. So we buy a car that we can't afford. That car becomes a need substitute. And now what happens is we're extrinsically motivated. We're stuck to a job we don't like to pay for a car that we can't really afford. And it just continues to undermine our need to get these our ability to get our basic psychological needs met. The key here is that, so be careful to think carefully about the goals you pursue. Because, as we described in the language for the webinar, some goals will lead to growth, integration, and psychological well-being, and some goals will auger us into the ground. They'll inhibit the development of growth and social well-being and integration, and that's really, I think, the key here. So I'm going to talk about these different levels of motivation for a minute, and this is from a paper from Deci and Ryan on motivation and goal pursuits, but it's basically delineating between amotivated, extrinsically motivated, and intrinsically motivated. So someone who is amotivated, it's not relevant, I'm not interested, I'm not getting off the couch, I'm just not doing it, right? That's just not even worth talking about, right? So what Deci and Ryan are saying is there are sort of 4 levels of potency to extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation means we're doing something for some sort of separable reward, whether it's money, whether it's a letter grade, whether it's, prestige or power or whatever, but we're doing something for a separable reward. And in intrinsic motivation, we're doing it because the task itself is the reward. There's no separable reward. Where the task itself is inherently rewarding. And so intrinsic motivation is the most potent form of human motivation known to man. That's really what I want you to take away. But there's another powerful takeaway here. Extrinsic rewards, dollars, letter grades, certificates, what have you, undermine our ability to become intrinsically motivated. So we might love to read. As soon as someone introduces a reward expectation for reading, we will naturally lose interest in something we otherwise were interested in. And so I'll let you think about that on your own time. But what the point I really want to make is, we're still operating on these 20th century carrot and stick methods of motivating our students. And we're, in many cases, we're unwittingly undermining their ability to become intrinsically motivated. And so that's really the main points. Now, the weakest form of extrinsic motivation is $1. I'm going to pay you, and the minute you stop paying me, I'm going to stop doing it, right? And the way psychologists measure your level of motivation is they give you a task to do in a laboratory, and they give you a reward expectation, and then they remove the reward expectation and observe how long you continue to do that task, right? Well, all you need to do is drive by an industrial complex at 5 o'clock to see how many people are externally rewarded. They're just, they're just there for the money. And, the minute you stop paying me, I'm out the door, right? That's it. Somewhat external means I don't really want to do it, but there's social pressure. Somewhat internal is like, yeah, I'm good at it, so I'll continue to do it. Maybe there's social pressure. I'm getting rewarded for it, or getting kudos for it. I'm a good student. I know how to get the A, but I don't really care about the learning. Like internal extrinsic motivation would be like, I will use myself for an example here, like exercising. I swim, 3 or 4 days a week, not because I enjoy the actual act of swimming, but I enjoy the benefits of swimming, the energy, the positive thinking that comes from it. And it's become part of my identity as a healthy person. So I'm still doing it for separable reward technically, but I've internalized it as part of who I am. Ultimately, the intrinsic motivation, I'm doing it because the task itself is the reward. There's one more fact I want to make sure I get out there on this, and that is a meta-analysis done by Deci and Ryan have shown that across domains, people who are intrinsically motivated outperform people who are extrinsically motivated. So that's just an important point. If you think money's the main driver that motivates people, think again. That's really the big idea there. So what makes a goal compelling? And I've simplified this, and looked at the literature. I've studied hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs. It's really simple. It's how do we match up our natural interests, which, by the way, I'm finding more and more evidence to show that we don't really have control over our interests. Like, they're uniquely ours. We have control over what we attend to, but our interests are somewhat hardwired, which is interesting to me, but we'll get into that another day. And then the intersection of our interest and our abilities, like what are we capable of being good at? We don't have to be good at it right now, but like, if I'm 5'3", I'm never going to be an NBA player, right? So what are we capable of and what are we interested in? And how can we mash those two things together, which I think of as authenticity? And how can we map that over what do other people need? Where's the intersection of those three things, right? Those are sort of the ingredients that make a goal compelling. I'm just going to put this another way, that the act of making ourselves useful to other humans elicits the engagement. It elicits the most potent form of human motivation. So if you want to understand why entrepreneurial people are so creative, such good critical thinkers, so resilient, resourceful, agile, right? Where does that behavior come from? Stop looking at the individual and look at the nature of the goal they are pursuing and the circumstances within which they are pursuing that goal, and you'll understand the behavior. And some of you who have attended our sessions before may have seen this slide, but if after listening to hundreds and hundreds of interviews, I sort of see this sort of core assumption, this deeply held, mostly unconscious assumption of the entrepreneurial person, is that it's my responsibility to figure out how to make myself useful to others. And by doing so, I empower myself. That's where the engagement comes from, right? So I've laid out this model here that I want to try to explain and kind of pull this all together. And I'm borrowing heavily from the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and it took me, a number of attempts to figure out how to pronounce his name, but nevertheless, he's done a lot of work with Martin Seligman, the positive psychology. But what Csikszentmihalyi is saying is, look, here's the current reality, right? And then we need a compelling goal. And you'll notice this compelling goal is at 45 degrees. When the goal is too low, it's not compelling, which is also interesting if you think about that for a minute, right? If a goal doesn't challenge us, it's not compelling, right? But the goal can't be, so far above our skill level that it crushes us. It can't be so far out of reach that we become overwhelmed or it's just impossible. There's a sweet spot there. And this has also been validated by the work of Albert Bandura in the realm of self-efficacy, right? So what Csikszentmihalyi points out, and others, is that when the challenge exceeds our skill level, we become anxious, right? And when our skill exceeds our the challenge, we become bored. Some would say that boredom is just another form of anxiety, right? But there's this sweet spot of optimal engagement. The point is that, you know, if you're pursuing a compelling goal, you're constantly being challenged, right? You're almost constantly up in that anxiety stage, but not being crushed. You're constantly being challenged slightly above your skill level. And the only thing that keeps you in that optimally engaged flow path is the compelling nature of the goal. If the goal's not compelling, you just won't tolerate the anxiety, the ambiguity, the challenge, the setbacks, right? And I wish I had more time to expand on this with you, but I'm seeing more and more evidence that, you know, the compelling goal pulls us into the future. And so we are rather than being driven by the past, right? And you know, one simple way to think about this is, you know, you all know that when you see a compelling goal, when you become aware of a compelling goal, it elicits within you a physiological and psychological response that is very similar to the ways in which the awareness of a threat elicit a physiological and psychological response, right? But instead of preparing you to fight or flee, it prepares you to approach, right? It energizes you to reach for the goal. And you know what? You don't have control over that either. That happens, you know, automatically without your conscious awareness in the presence of a compelling goal. So how do you get people to go from this sort of helpless to a mastery orientation? How do you get people to start moving towards a compelling goal? And this, for those of you who may be familiar with the Ice House training, this is the work of Albert Bandura and how it's called guided mastery. It's how to help shift someone from a helpless towards a mastery orientation. And it's 4 basic things. The first is, you know, of course, first we want to start with a compelling goal. I mean, that's sort of a given. Like, and before I go on, you know, I want to talk about the power of self-authoring, which is sort of what we do at the beginning of the Ice House program. It's like, it starts with thinking about what is it you're aiming for? Like, why are you in school? Why are you here on earth? Like, what is the life you want to create for yourself? And I think that's a really big missing piece in the community college realm. We're not starting with why. And what we do in the Ice House Student Success Program is ask students, why are you here? What is the life, you know, not what diploma do you want, because that's not really a compelling goal for most of us. It's what is it what's the life you ultimately want? So it starts with a compelling goal, right? And don't think about the how, what could go wrong, any of that. It's like, what is it you want to have happen? Then what we need are some little efficacy moments, a bat hit the ball moment. We need a small win that tells us this is possible for us. The second thing we need to see people who come from similar or worse circumstances succeeding in this domain. And that's super powerful. And that's why the Ice House Student Success Program is so effective, because the students are learning from kids, from other students that have been through the Ice House program that said, you know, I was really, really struggling academically. I came in, I had a 0.9 GPA, and then I realized this is what was happening, and these are the changes I made, and now I got a 3.4, right? So the relatable social models are really a key. You can have a compelling goal. Well, I would argue that the goal is not compelling if you don't believe you're going to get there. But the presence of relatable social models significantly increases your belief that you're going to achieve your goal. The third thing we need are facilitators or coaches or mentors or guides or people that believe in us, that challenge us to jump higher, dig deeper, run faster, right? That see more in us than we can see in ourselves. And that's always the case for 100% of us. We need somebody from outside of us to see something in us that we can't see in ourselves. True 100% across the board, right? And so what we're doing in the Icehouse Student Success Program is encouraging the students to find themselves a mentor, someone that's been through this, that can help guide them, that they can lean on, that'll help coach them through the process. And lastly, we need the ability to self-regulate, to break from the past. We need to learn how to manage our time. We need and more importantly, how to manage our emotions. And so many of us allow our emotions to lead. And as Daniel Kahneman says, we allow the rational, the irrational tail to wag the rational dog. So that's part of the guided mastery program here. So just to summarize all of this, that I'm going to come back to this idea is that if you want to elicit, or if you want to understand why entrepreneurs are so creative, so critical, such good critical thinkers, so resilient, so resourceful, so highly engaged, stop looking at their traits or their characteristics and look at the nature of the goal they're pursuing and their relationship to that goal. So, I think Nietzsche said it best when he said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." And that's really what we're saying here. If you have a compelling goal, and that means your goal is the intersection of your own natural interests, natural abilities, and the needs of others, and you can pursue that goal autonomously. You can become good at it. You can see your goal benefiting others. You will experience optimal engagement. Those are your basic psychological nutriments will be satisfied, and you'll experience social integration, growth, and psychological well-being. If the goals you're pursuing are goal substitutes, suboptimal engagement is guaranteed to occur. And that's really sort of the culmination of this webinar. Be careful of the goals you pursue because they matter. The goal elicits the behavior, and there's consequences for those the goals that we pursue. So the last question I want to ask all of you before I turn over to questions, the Q&A, is what is your compelling goal, right? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What is something that, and I sort of buy into this Jungian idea that our psyche is the battleground for ideas, and ideas, we don't really have ideas, but they have us. But the question remains, what is your compelling goal? What gets you out of bed? What you can't stop thinking about, that excites you, that energizes you, that has you like optimally engaged? So I'm happy to take some questions. Just a quick reminder that I am Gary Schoniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. Our area of expertise is entrepreneurial mindset, education, training, and professional development programs for individuals, academic institutions, organizations worldwide. You can follow me on Twitter at G Schoniger. That's at GSCHOENIGER. You can find me on or at EliMindset.com. You can find me on Facebook and social media. That's who I am. That's what we do. I am happy to take any questions you might have or engage with you offline in a more in-depth conversation. And lastly, just thank you all for your time today. I thoroughly enjoy presenting these ideas to you. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Gary. This is Leah hopping back on here from NACCE. We did have a question come in from Wendy, and she asked, How does one who is external to the student, we will never be the student, have any impact? Have any impact motivation? Wise when the best motivation is intrinsic. So I think you touched on that on your guided mastery slide, Gary, but maybe you could go a little bit more into detail on that.
Yeah, I think that's it, and I'm gonna recommend, Wendy. I should probably have this in the link. I mean, maybe I'll find it and send it with you to Leah. You can there's a paper written by Albert Bandura that sort of spells out like self-efficacy and guided mastery in about 2 pages, and it's but you're asking a good question, Wendy, and so that is like, we become the person that believes in the individual, number one. But I think it starts by asking people, giving people time to talk about what is it you really want. And I think what we don't talk enough about in community college realm is like asking students on day one, why are you here? Because, to go from a $12 an hour job to an $18 an hour job, it's not that compelling. I'm sorry to say that. It's not. What we want to get to is, Simon Sinek says, start with why. Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind. That's like economically compelling, and I get it. I can buy a nicer car, or like life is a lot easier on $20 an hour than it is on $15 an hour, what have you. But when you understand motivation theory, you understand that's not that compelling of a goal. So start by asking your students, what is it you really want? Spend some time in a journal and self-author, and encourage your students to do the same. The other thing I'll come back to, and which was my pointed question, Wendy, at the end, is like, and Bandura is very clear on this. You should have a compelling goal. There's something you're pursuing that's very compelling to you, that you're very clear about. Because without that compelling goal, we're just not going to self-actualize. We're not going to become all that we can become. We need to go. It's really interesting. I mean, I could get into the physiology here, but when pressure and challenge is externally imposed as opposed to voluntarily imposed, the same amount of pressure has totally different physiological effects on our body. So I don't want to get off in the weeds, but I would say encourage people to dream, to think about what it is they want to have happen with their time on Earth. Like, start there with some self-authoring.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Gary. We had a couple more questions come in as well, too. So the second question is from Madeleine. She asked, what if the person isn't sure what they want or what their goal is? How do you find their goal?
Yeah, well, it's not really easy. I mean, I'm not saying like, start writing for 15 minutes and the sky's going to part, the heavens are going to open up and you're going to understand your purpose. But like, spend some time thinking about where you would like to be in 5 years. There are many good tools about self-authoring on the internet. There's a lot of science behind this. Pennebaker at, I think, UT Austin is sort of the lead scholar in this area. But really, I would encourage students to journal and start to think about, where do you want to be in 5 years, right? The bigger picture is like, you've got to be aiming for something that you care about. Like, what are you aiming for? Because if you don't know what the hell you're aiming for, where are you going to wind up, right? But as part of the self-authoring literature, what is shown, and by the way, the self-authoring is why the Ice House student success increases student persistence by 28%, right? Because we encourage the students to think about the future they want to create, and we encourage them to think about what the future is going to look like if they keep doing what they're already doing, right? So they got something positive to think about, and then something kind of negative to avoid. Those are key aspects of it. So it doesn't, I guess the answer, Leah, would be, you don't have to be the be all end all, like your life's purpose, the heavens part, but like, what would be amazing in 5 years? What really would make you really happy if you could accomplish this in the next 5 years?
Hmm. Yeah, I love that idea of starting off with kind of those more manageable goals of, where do you want to be in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years? That's a great tip. Okay, our third question.
Leah, let me just
Oh, go ahead.
riff on that. So Albert Bandura, who's one of the most influential psychologists who have ever lived, is very clear about this. We need what he calls a distal goal. He needs a big, exciting goal on the horizon. And then you need those interim goals, like to show that you're making progress towards them. But you need both. It's not just about incremental goals of getting the degree or passing this class or getting whatever. You got to have the compelling goal and the intermediate goals. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, our third question is from LK. Does he have curriculum for us to teach our professors and for use with business and industry?
We do, and that would probably be the first place to start is, the Ice House. We have the Ice House Entrepreneurship programs. Their name is inspired by the book that I co-authored with Clifton Talbert. We do professional development workshops with the Ice House program as a leave behind. Over the last 8 years, we've trained 2,300 facilitators on 5 continents. Tens of thousands of students have been enrolled in our programs. The curriculum is now available we have a middle school version, we have a college version, and we have a small business edition as well. So, and a student success. I don't want to forget mentioning that. We do have a version of the Ice House program that's meant, all students are going to need to learn how to think like entrepreneurs. So we developed a version of the Ice House program for all students entering the college to embrace an entrepreneurial mindset to help them succeed in school and in life. Not everyone wants to start a business, but we all have this innate desire to be engaged in work that matters, right? And one of the points I'll just drop in there is when you understand it's all about the goal, it has much less to do with the individual. We then are able to understand that the entrepreneurial spirit is the human spirit. It's not just in some of us, it's in all of us. So sorry for that last little add on, but thank you for the question.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and it sounds like if you have greater interest in that, we can definitely connect you to Gary and his team for further information. Okay, well, that was our last question. So if anyone else has any further questions, please feel free to write those in the chat feature or the questions feature on your GoToWebinar dashboard. I did just want to say that Gary and some of his team will be at our annual conference coming up next month, October 13th through the 16th in Newport Beach. So if you're planning on being there, we would encourage you to make sure you make a point to meet Gary and his team, and you can discuss more details of what he shared on the webinar today as well. So I just want to give Gary one last chance to share any last minute words of wisdom or announcements with our webinar listeners. And if not, I can go ahead and end the webinar.
Yeah, so Leah, thank you. And thank you all again for taking your time out of your busy days to attend this webinar. I hope this has been helpful. We have a ton of information. We have reading lists. We have all kinds of case studies and research on our website at elimindset.com. As Leah said, I'll be doing a product information session at the NACCE conference in California. So yeah, and happy to have a conversation with any of you offline, email, phone call, whatever, if you want to learn more about what it is we do. And the last thing I'll say is thank you for what you do, for being in the classroom and the work that you're doing every day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gary, for sharing your time and expertise with us. We'll look forward to seeing you in October. And like Gary mentioned, thank you all. We hope that you found this webinar to be valuable, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in person next month. With that being said, this webinar is now complete. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.